Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mark Scott from the New York Times. I will try and avoid being the traditional publisher who bashes Till for his product and focus more on exactly what happens next, right? And so we're at this conference. It's obviously about encryption and decentralization. With your 100 million active devices, I presume the majority of those people are not downloading it for the data privacy security issues. It's more to get rid of the abrasive ads, or am I wrong?
I assume that there's probably a handful of reasons why people install an ad blocker, and I guess the number one reason by far is that ads are just simply very annoying to many people. But then there are multiple other reasons why people are inspired to install an ad blocker, and that is in many cases privacy. I think more and more people are concerned about that. Then there's security. Malvertising is a growing issue, and then especially on mobile, other issues like bandwidth consumptions, but also page load time is an issue. So I think there's a huge variety of reasons, but I would assume the number one reason definitely is that ads are just simply very annoying.
Yeah, because I presume in the end, an abrasive ad is a lot more conscious in people's mind versus the security, data privacy issues that are in the background.
Well, it requires a certain level of sophistication to fully understand the privacy implications of advertising and tracking, the security implications. So I think there is a subset of users that cares deeply about those issues and understands that, but Adblock Plus, with over 100 million devices on which it's installed, I think we have now reached a more mainstream audience. So traditionally it was really the text-heavy early adopter audience, but by now even my parents use it, so they certainly
They are biased though, right?
They maybe, but they certainly don't understand privacy implications of advertising. So I think it's a mixed bag why people install Adblock Plus.
So last year you sort of had the mobile product came out, particularly around the iOS changes, and then your own mobile browser. How is that going to go forward? You know, it is the now overused cliche that everything's moving to mobile. Of those 100 million devices, how many now are mobile, smartphones, etc.? And how will that change, how users use your service, as well as how you approach the problem, if that's the right word?
Yeah, so we launched Adblock Plus for both Android and iOS in September, so it's still relatively new. Many people aren't aware yet that ad blocking exists on mobile as well. So far since September, we've seen over 10 million downloads, which is an encouraging start, but we definitely see a lot of growth potential, especially on mobile, because people more and more are concerned about the annoyance level on mobile especially, but also particularly on mobile about issues like bandwidth consumption, especially in regions other than Western Europe and the US maybe. So this, just like everybody else, this is where we see a lot of potential for growth, obviously.
So walk me through sort of the gatekeeper broker position you put yourselves in. You have, people in the audience, hopefully, checking out the New York Times on their smartphones, and the advertisers on the other end. How has that relationship, both with the users, but maybe more importantly with the advertisers, changed since you guys came around?
What we are all about is we want to empower our users to gain control over their browsing experience. At the same time, we are working with publishers on establishing more sustainable and more user-friendly monetization methods. So one thing we do is our acceptable ads program, which means we're helping publishers to monetize users that have opted out of the traditional ad experience with alternative, less intrusive ad formats. And also quite recently we announced a new product that we're going to launch very soon called Flutter Plus, which is going to be the first payment system that works for the entire web, that works everywhere without any friction for both the users and the publishers.
Okay, so walk me through exactly how that's going to work.
So as a user, you can decide how you want to compensate content creators. And if you decide you don't want to see any annoying ads, you can choose how much content on the web is worth to you, and then our program will automatically distribute your funds that you put in to the publishers based on your browsing behavior and your engagement on those sites. So for the first time, you have a way to compensate publishers, automatically pay for content if you don't want to see any of the annoying ads, and with just a few bucks that you pay to the system, you can create the same or even more value for publishers than you would by seeing the ads.
So the idea being, instead of paying Wired directly, it's if they are 20% of my browser usage, whatever the metric is, they get 20% of the money I want to put up voluntarily?
Exactly. We are building an algorithm that is analyzing your engagement on the site, and based on that, your funds will automatically distribute it. And the interesting thing is really how little value ads actually create for the publishers. So it's very easy to compensate publishers with not much more than what you pay for a cup of coffee. You can create the same value for publishers if you engage with those sites. And the side effect of what we're doing is we're incentivizing great user experience. So if you rely on clickbaits, if you rely on slideshows, all those terrible experiences that were just designed to increase the number of ad impressions you can squeeze in per visit, all of that is disincentivized, because the more user-friendly your product is, the more people engage with your content, the more you will participate in the distributions of the Flutter Plus system.
So I'm really trying to take off my old publishing hat, so forgive me, but wouldn't that also still rely on the individual to voluntarily pay for whatever he or she thinks the content is worth?
Yeah, but as I said, it's so easy to compensate publishers by paying directly to them for the revenues they would generate through ads, because the ad revenues are shockingly small.
So let's flick this forward slightly and look at where this ecosystem might go in, say, the next 2-3 years. We were having a chat downstairs before the conference began, and you were talking about maybe there is the normal 60-70% of internet users who will not use your product because of lack of sophistication, or they like banner ads, whatever it is. The smaller percentage may be using the service, yours or others, and there might be a different sort of way of approaching those two markets. Can you walk me through how that would work?
Well, what we've seen is that there is a vicious cycle going on in advertising, in which, because of a lack of scarcity, there's just an oversupply of ad impressions. So naturally, prices are decreasing, and publishers are forced to allow more and more aggressive ads on their site. So right now, we're in this vicious cycle in which ads become less and less valuable, and at the same time more and more aggressive. And we believe this is not a sustainable way in the long run, because it is alienating the consumer. So what we're trying to establish is a more sustainable ecosystem in which users that opt out of the traditional ad experience, they can contribute to the value exchange in a different way. They can see alternative ad formats which are more user-friendly, less intrusive, but also more valuable because they're more exclusive, and they have more choice on how they want to compensate content creators by also being able to directly pay them.
So let's look at that 30%, whatever the percentage is, that may be using your service or others in the future. Exactly how would that work? And if I was a publisher / advertiser, do you have any metrics on how much more money you could offer them versus this, the current system?
Well, of course, it depends on the publisher, but what they can do is they can create two different versions of their site, one for the regular users and one for the users with an ad blocker. And we believe that by having fewer ads become more valuable, especially if you consider how attractive our audience is. The people that are able to install an ad blocker, they're very tech savvy, so they're a very attractive audience also for advertisers, but they're more demanding. You just simply cannot reach them with the same banners we've had for almost 20 years now that haven't really evolved. So they need to be addressed in a more appropriate way with just higher quality ads. But at the end of the day, fewer but better ads will provide more value, not just for the consumer, but also for the publishers, because bad ads are degrading their content and are alienating their users, but also for the advertisers that just don't want to be just an intrusion.
How do you think your role in the ecosystem is going to change as we progressively use smartphones and tablets versus desktop?
I don't think necessarily our role will change. What we just have to establish is a sustainable way to monetize content, both on the desktop and on mobile. And we're facing the same challenges on mobile currently, where more and more ads are becoming more and more aggressive, and users are just not willing to interact with them anymore. Most of the clicks, especially on mobile, are accidental. So we believe we need to establish something that is more sustainable, especially if we focus on a better user experience. We can have a more long-term approach that is lacking in the current way how the content is monetized.
I have to ask, because, you know, I have to. Is that your role? Why not, you know, the relationship the publishers have directly with the users versus you guys being in the middle?
Well, the users install our product, and the only thing we can do is we can create an offer for the consumers. If they appreciate it, if they download our software, if they use it because it enhances their experience, then I think we have a mandate to protect them from the bad experiences that inspired them to install Adblock Plus in the first place.
So then, fast forward, maybe in the medium term, if that's the right word, to 5 years. Exactly, do you have any sense of, will ad blocking remain a relatively niche, but bigger niche in the market? I mean, we look at some of the figures that were published this week about sort of mobile ad blocking, particularly in the emerging markets. Is that something you would expect to also pick up in the West?
Yeah, I think so. It's going to be interesting to see at what point there will be a certain level of saturation. Right now, ad blocking is growing because there's so much consumer demand, but it still requires a certain level of technical sophistication to be able to install an ad blocker. Maybe that will change. Maybe things will become easier. But I think we are focusing more on the tech-savvy audience. How big that audience is, that still remains to be seen. Maybe it's 30%, maybe it's 40% of the internet population. But I really think that those users, they just have to be addressed in a different way. So we're not trying to change everything completely, because for regular users, the current experience, they may work. But if users install our product, then they will just get a very different experience, which is more user-friendly and in our view, much more sustainable.
And on the mobile side, do you expect, you know, eventually we'll get to the similar level of penetration?
On the mobile, we're facing a few challenges, especially because we are dealing with walled gardens like on iOS, where apps just don't have all the privileges they have on the desktop, but the demand is certainly there. So I guess that will lead to more open systems, and that will also lead to more adoption of ad blockers, because consumers want to have control over their ad experiences.
Gotcha. I've been told we're opening up to the Q&A. Before we do that, raise of hands, who in the room uses ad blockers? Oh, yeah. Okay, we are obviously incredibly tech savvy and, you know, marketable to advertisers, so keep that in mind. Q&A at the front here. Yep, behind Jason.
Ludwig, you're from The Economist. You mentioned mobile, and I'm just wondering, I mean, people are expecting the ad blocking to be important on mobile. Is that actually true? I mean, most people use apps, you can filter those ads. Ads will be increasingly encrypted, there's other stuff. So I'm just wondering, what's the future of ad blocking?
It really depends on...
So 1 second, that was the question was the future of ad blocking on mobile.
I think it depends on what consumers choose, if they will remain in the app environment or if the mobile web will also be a big factor. So right now, ad blocking is only a thing for the mobile web. It's not really part of the app ecosystem, because we're facing those walled gardens, as I mentioned before. So it depends there. I guess if the mobile web is much more attractive to consumers because it allows them to have more control over their browsing experience, then maybe consumers will shift towards that. So I think at the end of the day, the markets will just decide.
Although there is a movement to have in-app ad blocking as well, right?
Sure, there's some ways, but right now ad blocking really is just happening on the web.
Questions?
Yeah, and what way is your system decentralized or encrypted?
Well, for us, it's maybe a bit different because Adblock Plus works on the client side, so it is not really affected by encryption. There are other ad blocking solutions out there that are new to the market that work on a carrier level, on a proxy level. So they are facing challenges with encryption, I would imagine, because they would basically just have to decide whether they are not going to filter all the ads or whether they're going to do sneaky things like man-in-the-middle attacks in order to be able to do ad blocking on encryption. So for us, running at the client, encryption is less relevant. Sorry? Yes, and they all run on HTTPS.
Question right here.
So I'm not a publisher, but I'm a technologist and a computer scientist. And you know, I have to recognize that some of the great good that ads have done in enabling companies like Google that have been tremendously beneficial to the whole ecosystem. Now, I believe your intentions are good, but thinking through to the logical conclusion, aren't you pushing us to a place where the open web becomes less open? Publishers start putting less content into websites and push more things into apps or behind paywalls.
No, I think actually the opposite is true, because what is threatening the open web is a business model that doesn't work. And if ads don't provide any value to consumers or advertisers, then this business model is not gonna last very long, and it has to evolve. And this is exactly what we are trying to initiate. We are trying to establish a system in which ads are more valuable again, because right now, as I mentioned before, they're just becoming more and more aggressive, at the same time less and less valuable for the publishers. So we believe we can establish a system in which fewer but better ads actually can provide more value. And again, to me, what is threatening the open web is a lack of a business model for the open web. And we can establish that if we focus on user-friendly monetization.
Yeah, David.
I just want to pick up actually a follow-up question to that, which is, don't you worry that you're going to push publishers or help push publishers who are already going in this direction into the arms of Facebook, where they go into a very walled garden? It's attractive to them because it's a great advertising model. They can just cut with, you know, they split the revenue with Facebook. Facebook knows everything about the readers already, et cetera, and your product doesn't reach in there. Don't you think that you're just going to end up hastening this move away from the open web into, well, just Facebook, really?
Well, I think it's really important to understand that we can't push anyone into anything. Ad blocking is a phenomenon of the web. It is happening, so we need to make sure that it does not become destructive. And the reason why more and more publishers use closed systems like Facebook is because the consumers are there, but also because the ads provide more value to them. So for us, I think the biggest opportunity is to create ads that actually provide value again, also for the publishers, and then they don't rely so much on platforms like Facebook.
So I'm told I have one more question, and I did give it to the gentleman over here, sorry.
Hi there. I have a slightly different question for you. I was just wondering, given the theme of this conversation, is it possible for you to aggregate people and present them as groups rather than just blocking it? So you can actually have a distribution of people rather than unique individuals. So the advertisers can get some value out of it, but this point of actually recognizing each individual specifically would be removed in that sense. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure, but what I think is extremely important for Adblock Plus as a product is that it is a privacy tool, and that it can be used by consumers to regain control over what kind of information they're willing to share with advertisers. So maybe that will lead, and maybe that relates to your question, maybe that will lead to more user-friendly targeting, because the market clearly says that more and more consumers are concerned about the current technologies, and there are many ways how to do it in a more user-friendly way, and hopefully the rise of ad blocking will help to establish those, because the amount of data sharing is not actually necessary, and you can create the same kind of value for advertisers with alternative targeting methods that don't have to be less relevant for the consumers, but give them more control over their personal data.
Great, and with that, I think we're done. Thank you so much.
Thank you.